If you can all take your seats, and please join me in welcoming Nick Wolf to the stage.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nick. I am your designated non-Michael presenter this evening. So I am, as the slide says, Nick Wolf. I'm a junior software engineer at Culture Amp. Culture Amp, you've heard enough about already. Now, for those of you who remember my last talk, there is one thing I love above all else. Can anyone remember? Feedback. Correct. It is feedback. How much do I love feedback? I include an email link for people to provide me feedback whenever I send them an email. In fact, I love it so much that when someone unfriends me on Facebook, I send them an exit interview for them to fill in. Surprisingly, only 5 people have ever filled this in. But to be fair, I no longer do this. But to be fair, one of them had just been consistently unfriending everyone because they were in a very bad place. So even though I no longer do this, I do think it paid off to be able to assist that one person. Now, I will be talking about my second favorite gem. Now, to give you a clue, given that I love feedback so much, I will be trying to keep all you Ruby people in line because I will be talking about Rubocop and avoiding arrest with Rubocop. Now, what exactly is Rubocop? Rubocop, thanks to Rubocop's own wording, is a static code analyzer and formatter based on the community Ruby style guides. What this means is that you can run the Rubocop command, which comes in a gem, my second favorite, to analyze all of your Ruby code and see how well it is performing in line with either the community Ruby style or against your own provided set of guidelines. So to give you a bit of an idea about all the things that you can do with Rubocop, let's go to the scariest part of every presenter's time and do some live demoing. Let us make this a bit bigger. Now, you'll have to excuse, for some reason, as soon as I plugged in the clicker, my laptop decided to switch to Japanese, meaning that I am currently able to present only thanks to Mac's ability to restore the session contents of my MacBook. So I don't know which developer is responsible for that, but thank you very much for saving the day. So in order for me to give you an idea of how powerful Rubocop is, we'll need to think of a good Ruby project that we can work off. Maybe something's big, maybe something that's been around for a few years. I'm coming at a bit of a blank, but since we are here at Roro, maybe we could look into Rails. So let us jump into, this tab has jumped around a bit. So let's jump into Code, Personal, and Rails 1. So in order to run Rubocop on a set of files, you can simply first, after installing it with gem install Rubocop, which will install it inside your platform, inside your computer, you can then run it simply with the command Rubocop. Now, when it's analyzing something like Rails, as you can see, it has quite a lot of files to go through. So this is actually taking too long. So here's one I prepared earlier. Now, here we can see that it took about 1:40 to run through. So if I run it again, does anyone have any guesses on how long it will take? I'm going to assume I heard 1:40, because that would be the logical answer. But Rubocop is sneaky because now it has completed the entire thing in just 4 seconds. So how exactly does this work? Well, if, like me, you become very suspicious anytime a new file appears inside your home directory, I try and keep it nice and clean. We can see here, there's still some work to be done. But this cache folder appears. So if I do ls-la and then I grep for cache, this cache file has appeared. So if we cd into the cache, we'll see it has a bunch of different ones and this weird 501 file. And inside that, we can see Rubocop cache. So when I first ran the command here on Rails 1, this was the first time it had looked through this entire file set. And that's why it took, in this case, 1 minute 34. It's getting a little bit faster. That's good to see. But when I reran it on Rails 2, that's why it was able to complete it in just 4 seconds. Now, if we jump over, one of the reasons that Rails is able to get so many past checks here, it does fail once, and this is because I'm using a more up-to-date version than Rubocop than Rails is, and I just didn't want to let that slide. So I will present it with its problem file here. But this is because inside the Rails project, it has a Rubocop YAML file. So if we have a look inside this Rubocop YAML file, then you'll see, for those who are a bit confused by BAT, BAT is a Rust version of cat, and it provides nice, pretty colors. It's cat with wings is their way of selling it. Now, as you can see here, inside the Rubocop file, it provides a whole bunch of customization, because this is one of the advantages of Rubocop, because if you disagree with the very, very strict Ruby community guidelines, then you can say, actually, I want to enable the lint for shadowing outer local variables. And you have the option of including that inside your YAML file. If I remove this, then suddenly Rails doesn't perform all that well. In fact, once again, this is going to take just a bit too long, so here's one I prepared earlier. Now, because my laptop crashed, I don't actually know if this has preserved the entire list. But if we go down the bottom, we'll see that it managed to complete that in 4 minutes, and it ended up with nearly 130,000 offenses. So depending on whether you go with the Rails style guide or the Ruby style guide, you're going to see quite a different range on how many offenses you have here. Now, if I jump over to my next tab, Rubocop can be run on individual files. So for instance, I can run it on version.rb. And we will see that I get a few offenses that I've placed in here. But I can also do a bunch of different options here. I can run it on an entire folder. And then it will tell me all the offenses for everything inside there. I love the fact I only discovered this when I needed a folder to test, but BuildKite, it's specifically mentioned in Rails. I didn't know. Now, another option I can do is Rubocop tools, and then I can do fail fast. And then the very first file that it hits with a failure, it will stop at that one and let me know, here we have a useless assignment. I can also choose to do Rubocop version.rb, and I can choose to do only, for instance, up here we had only string literals. And then it will only check for that particular cop. So I could run that either over a folder or over an individual file, but it gives you a few options. You can, along similar lines, change this from only to accept, and then it will find everything else that is in some way or another breaking the rules of Rubocop. Now, one of the options I have, if I jump over to here, is I can go Rubocop. Actually, that's right. I remember this command is so long that I didn't want to risk making a spelling mistake, so instead I saved it in my clipboard. And we will go. I can run Rubocop tools, and I can set the failure level. So if you notice, we have sometimes it will just be C for, that's one level of offense, and sometimes it will be W. So here I can set it to only show me W level offenses, and you could potentially try and work your way down from the most dangerous of mistakes down to the guideline suggestion options. One of the options you can do, at least one of my personal favorites, is you can even run autocorrect. So in the event that you have made a few mistakes during your time, oh, what have I done wrong? We are missing a dash. You can run autocorrect, and then it will run through and find all of the files that it can potentially seek to adjust. I realize I need to put in tools, otherwise that's going to take a long time. And then it will seek to adjust any ones that it is able to. So in this instance, it knows how to correct the string literals, prefer double quotes over single quotes, but it doesn't know how to correct the useless assignments. So that one, it has simply said, this is still an active issue that needs to be resolved. Now, the last one that I wanted to demonstrate is inside here, we once again have that Rubocop file. If I get rid of that, then I have a whole bunch of files in here that are not conforming to the new standards that I'm trying to keep it in line with. So this is where we would see the Ruby style guide generating those 130,000 errors. But what I can do is I can run this command here, which is auto-generate-config. This will create a Rubocop.yaml file, but it will also create a Rubocop to-do file, and it will list all your different offenses. Now, that's what the auto-generate option here does. One of the things that I personally think is a better suggestion is if you run it, it will only look for the first 15 offenses and list those individually. After that, it will say you have 16 offenses, or 200 offenses, or 2,000 offenses, in the case with the prefer double over single, which happens in Ruby. But you can add in this extra option of exclude limit 100. And I actually think it's better if you set that limit higher, so that instead of you saying, look, we've got this offense happening in 16 files, rather than go through them each manually and get it up to date, why don't we just say, well, we won't care about that rule. And that means that every new file you produce from then on is not going to be linted and kept in line. I think it is better for you to decide each of these rules and say, look, do we think it should be single or double quotes, or do we think we should, I mean, you shouldn't have useless assignments, that's a bad idea. But you should be able to say, in our ideal code base, what do we want our Rubocop file to look like? And then even if you have to say, look, the first 2,000 files we wrote, they break the rules. But we at least want future files to be in line. And that's where this exclude limit allows you to set a much higher bar. So instead of you saying, if it's over 15, don't even show us the list, and therefore probably just say, we'll just let that rule continue. You can instead set it to 100 in this case. Now this process is extremely long as well. So here's one I prepared earlier. This one takes about 6.5 minutes. And as you can see, there is an awful lot of things that Ruby does not like about the standard way that Rails is written. But you can in fact run a bunch of extra commands. There's a bunch of Rails rules that you can use. You can also run Rubocop performance. And these just continue. You can run RSpec as well. One of my old mentors once told me that you should do your best to ensure that all of your code tests, whenever you're submitting them, should be Rubocop compliant, or at least as close as they can be, because when I was a junior developer, I didn't know what was good code versus what was bad, and Rubocop helped me catch a lot of little things that I didn't really care how they were presented, but in fact, Rubocop has an opinion and therefore helped me to better be in line with the Ruby community standards. Even though I don't think I've ever seen a project that perfectly follows the Rubocop standards, but that's a separate question. Now I will jump back. So, oh, that's one too far. So we've talked about running Rubocop, how it caches its results, how you can look at different warning levels. You can choose to use either only a single cop or all cops except for a particular cop. You can play around with fail level. You can run Rails. As we saw in the tools folder, you can run fail fast and find the first possible error. And autocorrect will allow you to fix up the relatively easy to adjust errors inside your code, or style choices is how I will phrase it. The auto-gen and exclude limit, allowing you to have a better chance of actually having your code follow the Rubocop you want to see in the world, rather than the Rubocop that you are left with based on the difficulty of getting things in line. And one last thing, you can even use the error codes from Rubocop, because if it passes everything, it will give you a 0, and therefore you can have it progress through your build step, or you can have it continue past one of your Git hooks. But if it fails, it will return a 1, and therefore you know there's some error there, and it allows you to better adjust whether your Rubocop has passed or not. If you'd like to find out more, the first place you should check out is docs.rubocop.org, and you can also have a look at the GitHub project. They just recently added sponsor buttons. So if there is a gem that you particularly like, I know I have at least 3, that I would like to support. And one last thing, if you were here for my last talk, you may remember that every birthday I ask my dear friends and colleagues to give me my favorite gift, the thing that I value above all else, which is feedback. So if you consider me a friend or a colleague, or would like to do me a little bit of a favor, you can head to, this is me. I'm in this photo somewhere. I'm in disguise, so you may not be able to figure out where I am. You can find me either at GitHub with Contrino, Facebook with Contrino, Twitter with Contrino. What is Contrino? It was a weird word that no one had a username as. You can provide me feedback at nickwolf.com.au, but for my birthday, you can head to nickwolf.com.au/birthday if you would particularly like to, and fill in as much or as little of this as you would like.
When is your birthday?
My birthday is on Friday, so you have 2 days think about it. I deeply appreciate it. And please stay tuned for my next talk, which will be my all-time #1 favorite Ruby gem. Thank you very much.
I know there are going to be questions. It's not a question of are there questions, it's a question of how many questions are there. First question, who's the bad cop? Second question, where's your boombox?
Well, I have no boombox because of the code of conduct.
Right.
I didn't write it,
Okay.
Toby. Cool. You're responsible for putting decent behavior inside
If
there.
only I had any knowledge that this was going to happen. Okay, actual questions for Nick. Yes. There.
Does the Robocop codebase pass Robocop?
That's a good question. If it does, I suspect it would be the only one that would, but even Rubocop, I could see them saying, look, for our particular project, it doesn't make sense to be in line with this rule. Something I will have to look up myself, but I would encourage everyone to clone it down and test Rubocop against itself.
I'm disappointed that you didn't prepare one earlier.
What's the most helpful cop, and what cop annoys the piss out of you?
So one of the things that I think annoys me the most is the line length cop. Now, the line length cop, I think, is the one that is most frequently expanded based on, look, we need it to be in line for this file, so we'll make it 120. And then it's 250. And then I think I once saw a project where the line limit was 836 characters. At that stage, you might as well disable it. I think if you need to, for whatever reason, have an 836 character line in your code base, that's fine. I won't judge you. But I think a much better approach is to have line limit 140, 150, and then exclude the 7 particularly unique cases. Because otherwise you are preventing the future developers that will work on your code base to realize that, wait, this line has crossed 350 characters, maybe it's time to refactor. Or just look into multi-line strings.
Just firstly, my for the line length thing, I like to exclude. You can add a regex for excluding comments that are like really long. 'Cause I reckon splitting comments over multiple lines is a bit silly, but
Excellent.
yep. And have you tried Rubocop in parallel to make it go faster?
No. So one of the things I should cover is that even though I delved fairly deeply into Rubocop in order to prepare for this talk, there's still a heap of options that I don't even know what do. That I don't even know what they do. So parallel is one of the ones that I thought, all right, that looks interesting. Let's see how much time I give myself to prepare. But yes, plenty more options inside Rubocop to explore.
Then back. No.
Great talk, thank you. Your terminal styling was awesome. Do you have a config file or something on your GitHub that we can?
Yes, so if you head to, let me jump back. If you head to my GitHub, I have my dot files are all publicly available. It is very customized to me, but I would say pilfer from there as much as you want.
It'll be exactly the same, don't worry. Thank you. Just
Just a quick one. Have you got a script where on a git commit you could run Rubocop against just the lines that have been modified?
So you can look at providing, depending on how you write the git hook, assuming that's how you wanted to do it, then you could run it at least against the files. I would need to check in if you are able to run it just against the individually committed lines. But I know you can run it at least against the files. Pat?
Sorry, I should just use the mic. I don't think you'd want to run it just against the lines anyway, because adding a line in may change the complexity of the method. And so some cops wouldn't pick things up in that case if it's just a line-based thing.
Good point.
Also, 80 characters for life.
I now have a question for Pat. Do your projects perfectly align with the Ruby community style guide?
No.
Okay.
Also, he likes 80 character lines, but he uses hash rockets.
Any other questions? Yep.
Hash rockets are a different talk.
So, say you inherit a gem from someone else and it's got no Rubocop file. It's never been run through Rubocop. Where would you start? Like, what's the first step you'd take? Would you do the auto-gen thing that you were talking about? Or?
So I think if I were taking over a gem, I think the first thing would be I'd probably run autocorrect, see how much it fixes up, decide, do I agree with those individual changes? After that, you could then run the auto generate config and then use that as your to-do list, because that is the functionality that it's originally designed for. There are two ways you can do that. You can either say, look, today I'm just going to deal with this individual cop and look at how many offenses there are and how reasonable it is to get those things in line. Or you could instead say, look, this is the most offensive number, line length 863 characters, and say, I just want to get that down to 700. And then next time you could go, I want to get that down to 400. That's another way you can approach it.
All right. Last question.
Hi, great talk, thanks. Do you think in 2019 the Rubocop should have any versions in the formatter, or we should stop arguing and have Go FMT? Like in Go, they don't have any options. You just save the file and you don't argue about the style.
So I do believe there is a rival Rubocop style platform called Ruby Formatter where you cannot set config.
Well, there's two. There's also from Test Double Standard. So yeah, I'm just curious.
I personally like at least a bit of customization because it feels unreasonable to assume that there aren't going to be circumstances depending on your code base that would be perfectly in line with the original Ruby community style guides. So I think I still lean slightly towards something that you can configure, but my ideal is that people decide to write the Rubocop file before looking at their code base and saying, this is how we want our code to be, and then looking at what the offenses are, rather than saying, well, we have enough of this offense, so we'll just say that that's what we want anyway.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.